Welcome to Yes Also. I'm Susie Barrett, and my guest today is the legend of all legendary legends, Craig Cackowski. Maybe you know him from I.O., where he was a part of the Armando Show, Baby Wants Candy, Close Quarters, and Carl and the Passions, and the director of JTS Brown, which he helped create the form for. Maybe you know him from I.O. West, where he was the 3-time Del Close Award winner for Teacher of the Year, and was 1/3 of one of my favorite improv teams, Dasariski. You may have seen Dasariski on the festival circuit, or seen Craig there with his 2-person team, Orange Tuxedo, or you might love him as a regular on Drunk History or the Thrilling Adventure Hour. When I was coming up in Chicago, Craig was on the main stage at Second City. He's one of the best teachers I've ever had, and he continues to be a source of inspiration. I just saw him play last week for the first time in a while, and man, the kid's still got it. This episode is much longer than our normal episodes, but I promise it's worth it. The first half is a lot of history, including some hilarious stories from studying with Del Close in the 90s. And the second half is a real deep dive into all improv stuff, theory and forms and tips for better scene work. I found it to be an absolute masterclass. As always, make sure you check out the pics over at Yes Also Pod on Instagram, and help us keep spreading the word about this podcast by posting us or sharing us with a friend. We really appreciate it. Okay, here we go. I am so thrilled that you are here. You were one of my very first improv teachers.
Chicago
2000.
2000?
92,000.
Yeah.
In the year 92,000 AD.
Remember that year?
Oh, God, great year.
Crazy.
Post-apocalyptic dust. We were finding our way again. I want to know, because you were already an established improv guru by the time I landed in Chicago in 2000. When the hell did you start, and how did you find out about improv? Because it was not as ubiquitous when you started, right?
No. First of all, Susie and Ryan, thank you for having me. Big fan of the podcast.
Oh, man.
Begin with.
That's going to make us blush.
I don't love the word guru. To begin with, I think the difference between a guru and a good improv teacher is marketing.
And ego.
And ego.
Yeah.
Del was a guru because he wanted to be referred to as a guru.
Did he really want that, or did Sharna want that?
I think he wanted that.
Oh, interesting.
I think there was some narcissism there, certainly. I think he enjoyed being a guru. We're on a tangent already.
I love it. This whole thing is tangents.
The Del, by the way, is Del Close.
Ever hear of him, audience?
Who I knew personally.
What a drop. We're 15 seconds in.
So that would have been 99 when he died, just before
I know. I
got
missed
there.
the party. Also, right before I started Second City, Tina Fey and Rachel Dratch left, and everyone was like, oh, but you missed Dratch and Fey. It was the best show ever. Anyway. So yeah, when did you start? How did you find it?
Okay. Well, I started in college at the College of William and Mary in 1989. So I was a theater major. I did theater in high school and got super nerdy about it. I played the stage manager, the narrator in Our Town. Mm-hmm. Every college troupe does Our Town, or high school theater does Our Town. And so I wanted to do, Shakespeare and Sam Shepard and musicals. And I did all of that stuff in college as a theater major. But there was also an improv group. And
what was it called?
It was called IT, or Improv Theater, or IT.
Oh, great.
So
because IT didn't really have a meaning yet because the internet hadn't spawned.
Right. There was no internet.
So there was no double meaning to IT. It was just straight up initials. It.
Yeah. We refer to it as IT, and most people since then have referred to it as IT. And I was kind of the first of a long line of William and Mary improvisers who then migrated to Chicago. So after me was Allie Davis and Stuart Ranson.
Oh, no
and
kidding.
Then Brendan Dowling, Jenny Hagel.
Wow.
Greg Hess, Joey Bland, a lot of the improv Shakespeare guys.
Yeah, amazing.
The list kind of goes on and on. But I saw them in the cafeteria my freshman year, and they just seemed like the coolest people in the world. Of course, they were all super nerdy, but they just seemed like friends. They seemed like they were having a blast. Nobody was really paying attention to their short form show in the corner of the cafeteria, but I was riveted. Some of those people were theater people. Some of them were more just like majoring in whatever and kind of gravitated their way to the improv group. So I didn't join until my junior year. I auditioned my sophomore year, got rejected. By my junior year, I knew enough of them that they kind of knew that I was funny outside of the context of doing improv. And so I joined the group my junior year and became the director my senior year.
How did that leap happen? What a quantum leap.
I think just because like I took it more seriously than anybody else did.
And you were the only one who owned a black turtleneck?
Pretty much. And that was obligatory. And the beret.
Right.
But I, of course, had no idea what I was doing. Or it mostly was just putting together the running orders.
Right.
But it amounted to me just yelling at people a lot. Like I was a real dick. Like I would threaten to storm out of rehearsal if people weren't taking it as seriously.
Threatening to storm out is very funny.
But
I'm
never
going
did.
to storm out and it's going to be a really like stern march and I'm going to push that door really hard.
There might be a storming any minute.
The storms are coming. I cannot even imagine you yelling or being even the slightest bit angry.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I can. I can picture myself at that age.
So funny.
But we did Harold.
Whoa.
But we did it wrong.
Right. Were you read Truth and Comedy or
There was
what?
no Truth
there
and
was
Comedy.
no. Oh, that was that published 90s?
Truth and Comedy came out, I think, in 93, 94. There was also no internet, as we've covered already.
Right.
So there was
How
no
in the world? Yeah.
There was no way to share information about long form improv. So we at William and Mary had been trained in 1 3-hour workshop by a group from Yale that had been trained in 1 3-hour workshop by Sharna Halpern. So Sharna in the mid 80s was trying to do like a college improv tournament. And so she taught them all like whatever Harold was in 1985 to all these college troops.
In a 3-hour workshop for each troupe.
I think so. Wow. Yeah. And then somebody from the Yale group was friends with somebody from the William and Mary group. The William and Mary people made a pilgrimage up to New Haven, like got a little telephone line, version of their Sharna workshop. And so by the time I joined the group, it was like 5 years in. So every year, the upperclassmen would be telling the new team members, like, this is Harold and this is what we do. So we did like short form games as openings to the Harold. Like we did Pet Peeve Rant as a Harold opening. So and who knows whether that was what they were taught at the time. It may have been. It may have been a legitimate opening.
Pet Peeve Rant is actually, is that like you start with I love or I hate, or you start with I hate?
Yeah.
That is an opening
okay.
now. Yeah.
All right.
It works. I've actually taught it to groups. It's a quick entrance into finding premises that are rooted in truth and opinion. But we do like I love or I hate. So it can be either. Anyway, yeah.
So we were way ahead of our time.
You were, yeah. Trailblazing.
And all the first beats were like 3-line scenes. Like it was just like boom, boom, boom. That's your first beat.
We're here to do a 4.5-minute Harold for you.
And then the rest of our show was short form games. But I really kind of like the Harold more than anything else. And occasionally in rehearsal, we do what we call a free form, which is much closer to what an actual Harold is. Like something thematic, kind of linked together with scenes that are recurring, but not necessarily in any particular order or with any particular set games.
And that was just in rehearsal, not for audiences?
No, we were too scared to do that in front of audiences. The audiences were only other students, by the way. We would just do dorm shows, basically.
Yeah, right there with you. Similar to my college experience. Were you, as you were doing both short form and these long form dalliances, were you lit up more towards long form or by long form, or was it everything's equal, you just love improv?
I loved all of it, but also it scared the shit out of me. Like I would panic before shows. I also was doing theater stuff at the same time. So I was in The Crucible playing the Danforth, the judge.
Congrats.
Thank you. Pretty proud of it. And a bunch of the IT people went to make a pilgrimage to the Skidmore Improv Festival, which was like the first improv festival linking together a bunch of college troops. This would have been like 90 or 91, I think. And one of the people said and there was a couple other people in the group who were also in the Crucible. And one of the team members said to me I can't believe we're missing our top 3 people. We're all, I was like, wait a minute, I'm in the top 3? I have no idea what I'm
diary.
doing. But I was like, oh, people actually think I'm good at this because I'm so nervous doing it. But that exhilaration of kind of jumping into a show and being that scared, I tell people to tap into that adrenaline that you get. I still worry to this day if I'm not nervous enough for a show. You should be nervous, but it's like roller coaster fear. We're going to go on this big scary ride and we don't know what's going to happen.
Right. Who's the Duran Duran guy? Simon Le Bon.
Yep.
He says when he gets nervous before a show, he tells himself, you're not nervous. This isn't fear. This is excitement because you're about to do something amazing.
Wow.
And I love that because it really is. You can just reframe it. The assumption of your adrenaline as being fear is what causes you to spin out into an anxiety tunnel. But if you assume that it's excitement and you're so lucky and you get to do this, then it kind of changes the channel right away.
And that adrenaline makes our eyes wider. It makes our ears more open. You're more attuned to all of your surroundings, and all of that stuff is actually good for improv. It just can't force you inward and more introverted and more shut down. You've got to be open in that moment when you kind of tap into that energy, and then you're not going to miss any stimulus that's around you.
That is such a great point that I've never considered before. The adrenaline is an amazing improviser's tool. We as cavemen got programmed to like adrenaline is our body's. We
were running from saber-toothed tigers.
Yes, yeah. And adrenaline was our body's physiological way of paying attention more. Right? It's I need to know if that's a snake right now, and I need to know where I'm running to. And yeah, that's fascinating to be able to harness that and enjoy the superpower it gives you.
And you know that feeling of being at the top of a show where you're maybe just a little, your heart's rate is going up, you've got that adrenaline rush, but you're responding to something before you're even consciously knowing that you're responding to it, and then it gets a laugh right away of whoa, I didn't even mean that to be a laugh line, and it just because you're so on top of the moment.
Do you still get nervous for shows?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah, and it always depends on is it a new venue? Is
yes.
Is it a pickup group? It's going to be varying degrees. But yeah, I should be. I should be nervous for shows.
I don't get nervous for. I get nervous for new venues, new teams, or a high stakes person in the audience or something, or a large crowd. But yeah, my regular weekly and monthly shows I don't get nervous for, and I miss that little edge of. All right, I got to be on my toes. I can't play on my heels. I need to really, keep my head on a swivel here. The aliveness of that.
I play so rarely now, especially in LA, that chances are I'm going to be nervous for any show because, I'm just not as in practice as I used to be.
Gotcha. So you're the transition from William and Mary to Chicago. Why did you pick Chicago?
One of our troupe members, Chris Obenchain, had gone to DePaul before he went to William and Mary, and he had become a big Second City fan while he was going to DePaul. So he told us of there's this magical place, Chicago, of they do improv there, and there's a theater called Second City. We should all go and audition together. And we all kind of made a pact to do that, and everybody chickened out except for me and Chris. So I grew up in Virginia. I moved back home with my folks for another 6 months while I waited for him to graduate. He went to Chicago, got the apartment and everything. I never set foot in Chicago till the day that I moved there,
Incredible.
Which was February of 1992. And I've never been so cold in my life getting out of that car. I was what the fuck have I gotten myself into?
It is a next level of cold. Yeah. It defies your body's understanding of temperature. It moves into pain very quickly.
Just to the bone.
Yes.
Then that wind just blows at you.
Right off the lake, yeah. I remember when I first moved there, or I guess I moved there in the summer, but my first winter there, there were warnings like, don't go outside with your nose and fingers uncovered, or you can get frostbite in less than a minute. I was like, what the fuck is this hellscape?
I quickly learned to have no vanity about my appearance in Chicago
Of
whatsoever
course.
because I would wear layer after layer. And I had my routine down of like long johns, you know, T-shirt, flannel, sweater over the flannel.
Sleeping bag.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right away, were you going to classes at Second City? What was your journey?
The night we got there, Chris had gotten us tickets, and there was another friend of ours from the theater department, William Mary, who happened to be visiting that week too, who was like scouting Chicago out. He was more of a serious actor, but we went to the Second City main stage and sat up front.
What show was this?
It was Economy of Errors.
Oh, I don't even know the name of that.
Do you get the pun though?
Yes. It is not a comedy of errors. It
It's
is economy of
economy
errors.
of
A
errors.
laugh riot.
But Steve Carell was in that show.
No shit.
Ron West,
Wow.
Jill Talley, Mitch Rouse was not in the cast but was understudying. So great people. They also seem so old to me, particularly Ron West, who's been 60 since he was 25.
Yeah, I've never even seen a picture of him looking young. He's like the Betty White of male improvisers.
And truthfully, they were probably all like late 20s to, mid
Right.
30s, but they just seemed like adults to me.
Also, the Second City aesthetic, where everyone in a tie and a shirt that's tucked in. It is like a more grown up look. It has that Mike Nichols flair to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think for the improv set, Amy Sedaris and Scott Adset also joined them because they were
God
Torco people
damn it.
at the time.
Oh, how cool.
And when they do, their 2-act, sketch comedy show that's been written through improv, and then they do an improv set after that. And me and my friends in the front row yelled out like every suggestion. They were doing like a pad set, gym game. And we were yelling out things like the Barrymore dynasty, photosynthesis, like we were trying to be
noticed for being clever.
Yeah, we didn't want to get basic suggestions.
Right, yeah.
And I remember Ron West saying, several good suggestions from this table up top.
And you immediately orgasmed and fainted. Yeah.
That was it.
And that was
Yeah.
it. And then, the rest is history.
But I did not get hooked on Second City for whatever reason. Like, I probably in the next 3 years set foot in that place maybe 5 times.
Really?
Like, I did not catch the bug for whatever reason. And I was also thinking like, yes, I'm going to Chicago. I know Chris wants to do Second City, but I'm going to do serious theater as well.
Because Chicago's also a town for that.
Yeah.
With Goodman and Steppenwolf and, tons of theaters there.
I got in a show right away at the Bailiwick called Comrades and Lovers that was part of their Pride series and was all about Walt Whitman and his young male lovers. And there was nudity in it. Like I caressed a naked male buttock.
Someone else played Walt Whitman and you played the lovers.
I was all the lovers.
Yeah.
There were like 9 young actors who were the lovers and then like a middle-aged guy who was Walt Whitman.
Sending a postcard home to your mom, but omitting the details of this play.
I told no one about the play.
The Bailiwick's a good theater, though.
It was.
That's exciting to land in town and immediately get cast in something.
I was like, I'm on the rise. Like I'm
Yeah.
going to be a serious Chicago actor. And then Chris auditioned for Second City classes, did not get in, which happened to a lot of people back then. I think like Rich Tallarico auditioned like 5 times, Brian Stack about the same, like
No
just to get into
kidding.
classes, not the touring company.
Wow.
They were kind of strict. And so because they rejected him, I'm like, oh, well, I'm not even going to bother down there. And then a couple months after I'd moved there, I read an article in the Chicago Tribune about the different training centers for improv, one of which was Second City, another was Players Workshop. Like they didn't even mention the Annoyance at the time. They were still pretty underground. And Improv Olympic, or Improv Olympia, as it was being called at the time.
Oh, really?
Because this was the first time that Charnade had a lawsuit from the U.S. Olympic Committee.
So they sued her more than once.
More than once.
Gotcha.
Eventually it just became I.O. But
Right.
at this time it was known as Improv Olympia.
A quick tangent for the listeners who don't know this. So Improv Olympic was sued by the Olympics because their argument was people might be confused and think that this has something to do with the Olympics.
That our athletes are doing musical option. And
Right. It's so ridiculous. It's also like for someone to claim that they have ownership over, because Olympic is like Greek.
Yeah.
You don't own, like even the Olympics shouldn't own that as a term.
they're very litigious,
Yeah.
apparently.
Wow.
So Improv Olympia, I found out, lived at Clark and Belmont. So their shows were at the Wrigley Side Bar, just like at the foot of Wrigley Field where the Cubs play.
So kind of down the street from the Clark Street space they ended up on for years.
Yeah, literally like 3 doors. It later became
Bar Louie, Goose Island.
Mullins.
Okay.
Mullins, but it was called the Wrigley Side at the time. So the shows were upstairs, and then their classes were were on School Street, like 2 blocks from me. So I'm like, oh, okay, well that's close. And also it says they do the Herald. I know the Herald. But I moved to Chicago and never heard of Del Close or Sharna Halpern or Improv Olympic.
Good
I
for
only
you.
kind of found out about it after getting there.
Isn't that wild to think about when you look at the roadmap of your life now and how this has turned out to be such a destiny path for you? To watch it just kind of tumble like a Plinko chip and land in that spot right then. Isn't that wild? It's like mystical.
It's pure happenstance. Yeah, like if I had been cast in another show at Bailiwick, or I might have started to just go another path, or maybe I got into Second City instead. I don't know. But
Right.
like Improv Olympic became my home right away. Like I was on a Herald team week 3 of level 1.
No
Like,
kidding.
That's how, and not because I was amazing, just because I was better than anybody else.
Right.
But like there were so few people there that if you could get a coherent thought out at all, like you were right away on a team.
Who were your teachers?
Sharna and Del.
That's it.
That's
they were
it.
the only ones teaching at that time?
There were 3 levels. Sharna did all the level 1s. Del did the level 3s, which were just you could study with Del as long as you wanted. So I ended up taking Del's class 5 times. And because I was in Comrades and Lovers, I got to skip level 2, which was Miles Stroth.
That's hilarious.
But also like John Favreau taught, Kevin Dorff. So like various people rotated in that level 2 spot, but level 1 would always be Sharna, level 3 was Del, and you stayed with Del as long as you wanted to.
Talk to me. We've got to talk about what it was like to study with Del. From first impression, since you didn't even know of him moving to Chicago, yeah, what was your first intro to him? And then, yeah, walk me through all of it.
Your first intro is 8 weeks in level 1 of Sharna saying, when do you get to Del's class? Like she's building up his reputation, like that it's this magical wizard that you're going to, the big boss that you're going to meet at the end of the game.
And she has to, because she, at this point, has built her entire business on the back of this guy's ideas.
Yeah.
So she's got to give it good PR.
So she's planting the seed, for that cult-like, mentality. So, but it's not like he was going to the shows. Like he was not at the Herald shows at all. He was never around. He was only ever in his class. So I didn't see him physically until the first day that I walked into his class. He had a rubber band around his wrist that he would pull back and snap as like negative reinforcement, whenever he had the inclination. He was trying to quit smoking, I guess, because he had emphysema. He had quit hard drugs like 10 years earlier, and booze, I think, earlier than that. He wasn't allowed to smoke pot, but he would chew it.
Just chew the raw bud.
I believe so. Yeah.
That's so funny. Like you can make edibles. Like
You can.
yeah. Oh, that's so
not how
funny.
Del rolled.
No,
Yeah.
no.
And he would talk a lot at the beginning of class. He would lecture, or he would just kind of free associate with whatever was going on in his mind, and then eventually he would invite people on stage to do some scenes.
Was it coherent? Was it inspiring? Was there any whiff of the genius that had been PR'd to you?
I found it very inspiring. But I also have talked to friends and peers from around that time who had wildly different experiences, and he died in 99. So I was in his class in 92. And I think there was deterioration just in that 7 years, of his physical state. But I think it always came down to how inspired he was by that particular class, by that particular group of humans. And I kind of feel the same way as a teacher. Like, I always have the same information available, but not every class is equally successful. And like, there's gotta be, me meeting people in the middle somewhere of like, I've got to see like that enthusiasm from them. And the more they want out of me, the more I can offer.
Good
also.
Audiences are rewarded with better theater.
Exactly.
Good students are rewarded with better teaching. The engagement and enthusiasm determines how wide the door is thrown open, and then how many more keys we get out. Like, because it's like, oh yeah, and then that reminds me of this, and yeah. So what were some things that were on the inspiring side that he taught you, or do any like discernible isolated lessons remain from those classes?
My friend Michael Cohen, who passed away a couple of years ago, had these extensive notes that he took in Dell's class, and he used to post them on Kevin Mullaney's old improv message board. And whenever I thought that I had come up with something in improv, like I would go back and read MJC's notes on his Dell class and be like, oh no, that was Dell. That was not me who came up with that. So he had just been the person who had been thinking about it the longest and the most seriously, at that time. Specifically long form improv, like, really was his baby, and like, we wouldn't be where we are if he had not pushed it so much. It's not fair to the other members of the committee to call him the inventor of the Herald. Like, I've met some of the other original committee people from San Francisco, and like they take exception to that. Like, they all developed this form together. However, it was like 1969, and it was like very like free flowy and trippy, and like a Herald might go for like 2 hours back then, So Sharna really is the person to credit for taking the wild shape of the Herald as it existed in the 60s and 70s and putting the 3-beat structure and the time dash structure on it. It was basically combining the short form game time dash with Dell's more unwieldy, like, thematic piece. And so when they mapped that together, that became kind of the modern Herald. But we rarely did Herald in Dell's class. We would, the form that became deconstruction, he was workshopping in class. He would also do these things like rituals where we would just like bang on, he would like dim the lights. We'd bang on chairs for like a half hour. And
while he napped.
While he napped. He'd be like, how long do you think you were up there? And we'd be like, I don't know, 25 minutes. He was like, it was 28. I was like, okay, what lesson am I supposed to glean from that? But there were a lot of great people who were kind of starting at the same time as me, and Sharna formed like an advanced group for Dell to work with that included me, Laura Kraft, Neil Flynn, John Rosenfeld, Pep Rosenfeld, as you know him. And to the point where when somebody from the other class tried to make up in this advanced class, Dell would like, you're actually not qualified to be here. These people are taking improv seriously,
Wow.
And get out of here now,
As you're all like frozen over your drum beating position on the backs of your chairs.
We're just waiting to bang on these chairs, man. Get out of here. You're harshing our vibe. But I remember the first like really like deep, like incredible scene that I ever had was in Dell's class, and it was me and Neil Flynn, and it was like a George and Lenny from Of Mice and Men. Like, I was the dumb guy, he was the smart guy, but it was like a post-apocalyptic world where we couldn't go outside, and this is all stuff that we kind of discovered organically in the scene. And it like, you would rarely see a scene go longer than 5 minutes. Then, and Dell just like let this thing keep going and going, and we probably went 20 plus minutes, and it was all great. It felt incredible. Neil, then and now, just an incredible actor.
He's great,
like so in the moment, like there were laughs, but it was also kind of creepy, kind of scary, and Dell just like raved about it afterwards. and then pimped us into doing those characters again in subsequent classes. He'd be like, well, let's do some scenes. And if we have a visit from our friends X and Y, I wouldn't complain. And then every time that he brought it back, like it just huge dive in quality every time. Of like we could not recapture the magic of that scene.
Yeah.
So after pimping us like 3 times, he's like, okay, well that clearly is not going to work again.
God, it's so funny. It's also such a great example of something that is so cool and at times frustrating about improv, which is you can't capture it again. No. It is that moment. Even the same 2 people doing these characters that you know very well for the same audience, it doesn't matter. It was there in the moment. You were like surfing that wave. That wave will never appear on the ocean ever again. So like you cannot do it again.
And you'd think that guy would know it better,
right.
better than anyone.
Right.
And yet that scene must have had such a deep effect on him that he had to see it again.
Although, yeah, he strikes me as a guy who's not concerned with output as much as like rolling around and seeing what you find, right? It's like if he was doing 2 and 3 hour heralds and if he's having you bang on a chair for 28 minutes, it's more like, well, let's see what happens.
And that really is what I took out of his class was the exploratory and experimental nature of it. Like when I see people say of like, oh, Del Close and his game of the scene theory, it's like, oh no, that's not a Del thing. Like, you know, Del is a little like, I mean, Del is like Jesus Christ in so many ways, but the way that I'm thinking of is just like all the different sects of Christianity. You know, it's like lots of people have been inspired by Del and kind of like have taken the nuggets that they like and, you know, taking it off in their own way. So the family, which was the team that he worked most closely with, which included Ian Roberts and Matt Besser, you know, they kind of arrived at some of their own approaches to improv, you know, partially off of Del and partially just off of their own opinions and experiences. And that, you know, branched off to become UCB and their whole method of improv. But that's not necessarily what Del was working on.
Right. He wasn't teaching that to them as a foundational thing. They were extrapolating that out of the work they were doing.
Yeah.
Kind of. Yeah. So when you were doing heralds there, what was that learning curve like since you were coming from a wildly different herald experience?
I quickly learned the more proper Chicago way to do it. You know, openings were very freeformy. You know, some teams did set openings, but it was more just considered that you're going to do some sort of and when I say pattern game, it's not just the standing there and saying, you know, tree,
leaf,
blower,
doing blow,
cocaine,
a lawn guy who does cocaine on the job.
Good.
Yeah. Good,
Susie. Good job.
Yeah.
But even that, I think we were adding more character and inflection than you see in pattern games sometimes, you know, because my pet peeve with it is when people are just kind of like very much in their heads thinking hard. Like, I just don't want to see a bunch of people thinking real hard on stage.
Yeah.
But they were pattern game-ish where you're kind of riffing off of something, but typically there'd be some sort of like, you know.
You're moving your hands in the air right now. Yeah, like
yes.
a weird hippie, like a sound and movement element.
There is a hippy-dippy element of it too, which the performance arty aspect of improv that had carried over from Del in San Francisco was also in Chicago as well. And I think specifically the guys in the family didn't love that. So, or at least Ian and Matt didn't love that so much that didn't translate over to the UCB Heralds. But the family I would see them every week. Like, they were so inspiring. This was the ultimate version of the team was Besser, Ian, Miles Stroth, Ali Faranakian, Neil Flynn, and Adam McKay.
Amy Puller and Matt Walsh weren't in it at that point?
They were, no.
Okay.
Amy was on a team with Tina Fey called Inside Vladimir. Tina was also on my Herald team, so she was the only person who got to play on 2 Herald teams.
Double Dipper.
Walsh mostly did stuff at the Annoyance, though he had done IO before I got there, and then he and Ian were in the same tour co. And then UCB, the Upright Citizens Brigade, was its own kind of beast, which was they did like sketch shows and like performance arty kind of pieces. Like Adam McKay is going to throw himself off of the top of a building, and kill himself on February 18th, 1992, but and so like these.
And what was that like? Him saying like I'm gonna jump,
Yeah.
and people on the street not knowing it was performance art.
Exactly.
Whoa.
Yeah, and then they would throw a dummy off of the top of the building or whatever.
Oh my god.
Yeah, like they would do like all of these kind of like edgy,
Right.
immersive things.
Immersive, non-consensual pranks.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Horatio like got arrested, doing one sometime.
What was
So
that one? Do you remember?
I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, it's like a little bit. It's like part Jackass, part Sacha Baron Cohen.
Yeah.
It's like it's immersive, but the audience doesn't know they're participating in theater, so it can't really be called theater, right? It's just to them, it's psychological torture. Like they thought that they saw a guy die.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's mostly Besser and McKay that were kind of like pushing for that. Like
Right.
They love that kind of edgy
punk
sort of
rock,
stuff.
yeah.
The punk rock ethos. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like Amy, I think was the last to join, and Walsh as well. They weren't really part of it at the time. There were some other guys involved. Some of the other guys from the family would do UCB shows. I ran tech for one of their shows, which I think was Ian, Besser, McKay, and Flynn. So it was like it was kind of like a catch-all thing for like Besser's various experimental projects.
At the time, while you were in this, and it's like these guys are doing a show over here, and Tina's on these two teams, and the Annoyance is starting to have success. Did it feel like the start of something? Did you feel the something of it?
I felt that it was great. I felt that it was special. Nobody was paying attention to it, though.
Right.
Like, the Chicago Reader, the free paper, was actually pretty good at covering anything in town. So if you did a show, not just a Herald show, but if you did a show that had some sort of proper run, they would come out and review it. Like they had so many theater critics, but it was not translating over into any sort of popular success. Like we were upstairs at a shitty bar, shitty stage, mostly for other performers. The very first show that my roommate and I went to see, we were the only two people there, and the ad in the Reader had said reservations recommended. And so when I called to make my reservation, Sharna, of course, was the person answering the phone. She's like, "Is this the same Cackowski who signed up for classes?" And I said yes. And basically she got 2 admissions out of me when 3 days later I would have gotten my free student ID.
God,
she didn't say of just like,
so
"Oh, I'll give you your
Sharna.
student ID."
Nope. And did you know there's a rule that on Wednesdays you pay double if you're about to be a student? So actually, I need 4.
Okay,
Yeah.
that sounds straightforward to me.
Yeah, you own me.
But and not only the people I've name dropped already, but like Rich Fulcher, John Glazer, like incredible people. And then there was Jazz Freddy, which was this other group who were people who had kind of moved on from IO by then. So I wasn't seeing them on Herald teams, but that was like Rachel Dratch, Noah Gregoropoulos, Pete Gardner, Kevin Dorff, Dave Keckner, Miriam Tolan, Brian Stack, and so to me, those teams that really inspired me were the Family and Jazz Freddy. The Family was more of the edgy, experimental punk rock thing, and Jazz Freddy were doing more like slow 2-person scenes, and they felt like sophisticated and theatrical. So that's kind of what I was absorbing. And I also was like every night of the week, I was doing something improv related, going to a rehearsal. Like I was on like 5 Herald teams before any of them clicked, like, and they would shuffle up the Herald teams like practically every schedule. And Ian and Adam were my coaches, and then later the team that I was on with like Tina and Tallarico and Laura Kraft, Besser was our coach for the longest time, and then Pete Gardner from Jazz Freddy. So like I just had the best people, but No, it was, and Second City, again, like I was not going to see shows there, and we were all like, those fucking sellouts, man. Like everybody had a very low opinion about Second City.
Because, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Until they started to hire IO people, and then we started to permeate over there.
Gotcha. I was going to guess that it was because the shows there are a little bit more angled for tourists. They're not doing anything dangerous. They're making jokes about politics and doing like snappy blackouts and have a tinkling piano, and I guess IO has that too. But
IO very much had a tinkling piano. Jeff Richmond was the piano player for all the Heralds for years.
Wow,
amazing!
He
was great.
Later, the SNL music director, right? Is that?
Yeah. And Tina
Tina's
Fey's husband,
yeah.
and wrote all the music for 30 Rock and Kimmy Schmidt and all those shows.
How dare we call him a tinkling piano?
Well, he was pretty tinkly back then. Like, let's be honest. But yeah, Second City was political and social satire with a very much Chicago bent to, and they had their format since 1959, but they were the only game in town that was paying anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you would start out as a touring company member, and then they would have the ETC, their smaller stage, and the main stage. And I remember Miles talking about an audition that like all the Family guys went to and all the Jazz Freddy people went to, and Second City ended up hiring 2 of their waiters to be the new the new touring company members. So it was very much a mom and pop, like very insular world. But then once you started to get like Stack and McKay and Flynn and all those guys in there, then the floodgates just opened, and then you started to see a lot more cross-pollination between IO and Second City.
How did those guys break in without having the server pedigree? That
It was kind of undeniable. I mean, the level of talent that was there. And I think like Jazz Freddy got some like national magazine coverage. Like there was a article in American Theater magazine about the new improvisation, and I think those guys were just doing enough stuff around town that even in this relatively small world, like Second City knew about them at that point. And then once a couple people were in, they started talking up their friends and getting them in as well.
Yeah. So now, from your perspective, at this point, Second City started to get a little bit more clout, a little bit more comedic edge. Is that what attracted you to want to audition there?
I would go see my friends do their level 5 shows. So I saw Tallarico and Bill Cott were in the same one. I definitely saw Amy's. I saw Dassey and Steph long before they were married were in the same one.
Wow.
With Seamus McCarthy and Tina, and I thought all of those level 5 shows sucked. Like even with the people that I liked a lot, like I just didn't want to be a part of it. I just didn't like the style of it. There would always be like one bald guy at the end who would come out and wave of like he wasn't in a scene. Like there'd be like 15 people. 15 people in the class. There would be a middle-aged guy in shorts of like, thanks,
They gave him the exit wave. None of his sketches made the cut.
So I never studied there. I only took class with Sharna and Dell, and then I took class at the Piven in Evanston, where all the Piven family.
Byrne Piven, right?
Byrne and Joyce
Yeah.
were the patriarch and matriarch, and then Jeremy and Shira, the daughter who ended up marrying Adam McKay.
And Jeremy Piven, people will know as the manager in Entourage, among many other film and TV roles. But yeah, he's son of a theater mogul in Chicago.
And then the Cusacks were all part of the Piven theater
Right.
As well. So the guy who directed Jazz Freddy, Jim Denon, was one of the teachers there. This is very much just a tangent at this point, but But the thing that really impressed me upon there was we were very much taught, I think at IO at the time, of like, this is the day that. And my very first scene I did at Piven, like they froze me like a minute in, like after something had been established, something game-ish, and they said, great, this is every day. Every day is just like this. And I'd never heard that before. And so that kind of like then got me on the mindset of more like behavioral, relationship driven scenes where it's just like finding a character's qualities and kind of repeating those. And this day is not special. This is every day.
This is how this person is. This is how their relationship dynamics go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Has that continued to permeate your style of play now, or do you have a blend of both?
I think so, and we can get into this when we start talking about Dasariski and quartet, but that's very much kind of the mindset of these shows that I've done with Dassi and Tallarico and other people throughout the years is very kind of relationship-driven improv. In truth, I don't think this is the day that, or this is every day is, the solution to any scene. Like having both things in your tank is a pretty healthy thing for an improviser to be able to do either one.
Because that's how life works too.
Yes.
Like I have my character traits that are every day to me, and I also experience days that something happens.
Yeah.
Through my filter. Yeah.
You are who you are, but then you're affected by who you're with, and then the particular circumstances that you're in will tweak a different part of you.
Right. Really quick, another tangent I want to dive into. You were saying you saw Friends shows at Second City, and you rattled off Rich Tallarico, but how did you two meet, and how did you and Dassi meet?
Tallarico was on the first team I coached. So not only was I on a team week 3 of level 1, I was coaching a year after I started at IO. So it was so small back then that you would move up the ranks so quickly. And I was younger than practically everybody on the team, except for Arden Marine and Rich Tallarico, who were both teenagers at the time. They were both 19. And then a bunch of people who later became teachers, Liz Allen, Lily Francis, Kevin Mullaney, Paul Grandi were all on that team that I coached, Frank Booth. And so Tallarico was on that team as a 19-year-old, and then my team, Mr. Blonde, snatched him up right away. Like you would poach good players from new teams and move them up the ranks as soon as you could. And there is something that I kind of miss about the more cross-generational thing too, where a younger player who is promising gets thrown in with some veterans right away rather than, there is something to be said for always playing with your peers, like the people you came up with, the people you're closest to. But I think particularly as a young player to be able to kind of jump in the deep end with people who are already kind of masters at it, you learn so much more quickly, being surrounded by people who are way better than you.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, there's more of a safety net to your scenes because they know how to take care of a scene better. And you're also you're guided from the inside by the way that they see a tag or the way that they time dash things. Now you get to benefit from that current of that river.
Yeah.
Or at least that's been my experience. The times that I've played with way advanced people, I'm like, oh, whoa, this is okay. Yeah, I never would have thought of that tag. Here we are. We're in the run,
I'm thinking of because one of my students got to play with the Bozos the other night with Jim and Will and Sarah at the Ouija's shows. And they're already a Herald team player at Ouija's, but they said right away they just saw a palpable difference of playing with those people and just how connected and patient they were and how they were using everything that was there. And I think as a young improviser, your mind is going so fast and you're missing so many things because you're thinking so hard and you're trying to get back to an earlier moment or you're trying to think 3 moments ahead. And just the people who can just lock you in and calm you down and get you to focus on these words right now.
The scene is right here. It's not 6 lines from now and the clever thing we can come up with. It's right here. Exactly. We have it. Yeah. So go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So Tallarico I coached. We stole him for our team. And then Dassi was on a team called the Lost Yetis with his future wife, Stephanie, his brother, Ed, and Seamus McCarthy, and a bunch of other folks. So they were kind of like a rival team to us.
So then what sparked you to want to audition for Second City? You're watching shows with a shitty ending of a bald man waving.
I didn't want to be that bald guy.
Right.
I saw Stephen Colbert's last show at Second City, and that made me want to be there. So have you ever been to somebody's last night at Second City?
I have, and I can't remember whose, but I've seen that.
It's always a big deal because you do your favorite sketches throughout your whole like tenure there. Like friends come back, you get a pie in the face, and you give a speech and you cry. So a friend of mine dragged me. She's like, you have to see this guy. Like, he's so great. And it's his final night there. So we just got there just for the improv set. It was Colbert, Paul Dinello, and Amy Sedaris, you know, his partners from Strangers with Candy, had already left Second City at that point. They had flown back and they did like all of their favorite sketches, which were so incredible. Like, to this day, like, he probably, along with McKay, probably was the best writer, you know, at Second City that I've seen. Like, and he just seemed so cool, and he was so moved in his final speech. You know, he wept, and like everybody was crying, and you know, you've got whipped cream just dripping down your face and onto your suit, and I'm like, I want to do that. I want to, you know, I want to have that last night. It wouldn't be till 7 years later, but I got in shortly thereafter, and I had auditioned a couple times, so it wasn't like I was totally ignoring that place of like, I knew like that was your entry point for more of a career in comedy. And I knew that they wore suits, and I had like this ridiculous like double-breasted suit, and like nobody else was dressed up, and like
powder blue.
It was gold, actually. It was a gold double-breasted suit.
Whoa.
Like huge shoulders, like looked like David Byrne. Stop making sense. And I remember Noah Gregoropoulos telling me years later of like, you looked palpably uncomfortable in that suit. And so when I finally got in, they had more of a like a straight to callback situation, because like a bunch of people had left at the same time, including Colbert and Carell. And they just kind of like brought in a bunch of the best like IO and annoyance people from around town. And so you got to do a scripted scene, you know, like a cold read. You got to do like more of like a long form piece. And like I was late for the audition, like my bus was like stuck in traffic, so I like hopped out of my bus, like grabbed a cab. Like I was wearing jeans, like it was early, I was hungover, I didn't care.
Yeah.
And I was so much more relaxed for that audition.
Yeah, a far cry from gold suit to that. Yeah.
Comfort.
Right.
Is the thing.
Right. Yeah. And that the idea of like removing some of the stakes from your mind, or being a little bit more present. When you're late, you can't help but be present.
Yes.
And it's like, fuck it. You know.
I missed the warm up. Like my group was being called in as I showed up.
Oh,
you know?
God. Yeah.
And it worked out.
Right. Some of that healthy adrenaline. Yeah. What was your experience overall at Second City like? Now, you were a cast member when I arrived in Chicago, I think. Would that
Main
track?
stage or ETC?
I think main stage,
Okay.
2000. Does that sound right? Like you and Tallarico and...
I did 3 shows on ETC and 2 on main stage. And so I probably was just getting moved up at that time. And when you first go up, you're kind of filling in somebody else's parts until you create enough new sketches to write your own. So I was probably filling in for Kevin Dorff around that time. So I did probably about 2.5 years in the touring company. I was able to stop having a day job. Like I haven't had a day job since 1995.
Wow,
so,
amazing.
Now, not every year has been as good.
And I do have my night job of stocking Amazon shelves.
Oh man, I work the graveyard shift, you know, in the factory every night.
But no day job.
But yeah, I was waiting tables and tending bar like all this time in Chicago, and so I was able to quit when I joined the Torco to get $75 per show.
Gosh.
But the living expenses were minimal.
Yeah.
Back then, also.
Good experience touring.
Yeah. I wish that I had toured more, because mostly when you hear touring company, you expect that you're in a van and just like seeing the country. I would have loved that. It was mostly just like one night in Iowa, back to Chicago.
Yeah.
It was a lot of colleges and like JCCs and community centers like around the Midwest.
Yep.
But you did best of material. So I did a lot of like, again, Colbert and Carell and McKay material that had been written for the previous few years on the main stage. And so you learn a lot doing those classic sketches, and you start to learn the math of comedy a little bit. Like If I say this line straight through, no laugh. If I pause midway through, huge laugh.
Right.
If I raise an eyebrow or do a gesture, and it's not like these are calculated things. It's more just like through repetition of doing these sketches over and over, you start to learn how to adjust to different crowds. So definitely timing.
Yeah.
As much as anything is what I learned of like the relationship that a performer has with a crowd and how each crowd is a little different. And you can't just kind of barrel through and do it the same way every time. You need to be sensitive. And then different people would come in. Like there was always a lot of turnover in Torco, or you'd have understudies in. So you're always dealing with new performer energy as well. Every running order is a little different. So the flexibility of that, I think, was also helpful.
Yeah. I've heard other people who have done Tourco and ETC talk about that once you're a cast member at Second City, you get access to their archive library of just tapes of old shows and everything. Were you watching those to see, like, how did Carell do this sketch, or get a sense of his timing and what worked?
Yeah, this was VHS, of course, then, and you couldn't see anything. So it's like one solitary camera from way back in the room. The
Three
sound
fuzzy
is bad.
halos and a muffled voice. Yeah.
And the transcription is also maybe not accurate, and you're also going off of like kind of your director saying of like, I think they actually said this. Later, for those people doing it in the aughts or later, like everything's digital and they have better transcriptions. They shoot it with a 3-camera setup on opening night to kind of lock it in. But we were not working off of anything sophisticated at that time. But yes, I did learn a lot. And then I would, as a Torco member, you would understudy the main stage in ETC. So I got to go in. I filled in for Flynn, for Stack, for Jim Zulovic, Scott Adsick, Kevin Dorff, Scott Allman, and then that great show that Dratch and Faye were in. I understudied like all 3 male roles in it. I did a lot of that was Paradigm Lost. I did a lot of performances of that, and that kind of like. That main stage as an audience member is so intimidating, and it's like a 350 seat house and it's full every night. So it can kind of start to demystify it a little bit to get that understudying experience. So that was another huge thing from touring is getting to understudy. And
that's a big homework assignment to be off book for so many tracks. It's like if you cover for one person one night, that's like 6 certain sketches. And then if you cover another person, that's another night, that's different roles in every sketch. Yeah.
When Brian Stack and Miriam Tolan were going on their honeymoon in Ireland, I was told like 3 weeks ahead of time of like, they're going to be going on their honeymoon. You'll be in for 2 weeks. Great. So I was kind of starting to learn it a little bit. And then they called and they're like, Brian has a cold. Could you fill in tonight? And so like off of the little bit of the scripts that I had and just my memory of seeing the show, I had to run down and like learn it in 2 hours and do like a quick like T's and B's with the cast. And like that was another one of those adrenaline experiences. But I would go see the shows a lot. So I was always pretty good at being able to remember just as an audience member what people were doing.
Right. And this taps into your theater training, like the discipline of acting and like, being on top of lines and getting
Learning
all the
a
nuts and
script.
bolts down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the formation and coaching and directing of JTS Brown. Legendary IO team, and you were their director and you kind of created a form with them.
Yeah.
Right. Original. Yeah.
An incredible experience, like definitely one of the highlights still of my improv career. And we kind of went through a rehearsal process that I've experienced 3 times. Once as an audience member, because Jazz Freddy did it. Once as a cast member, because Close Quarters did it, which was a show that Noah directed, and me and Bob and Rich and Steph and Peter Gwynn, some other folks were in. And then JTS Brown, which is basically 3 rehearsals a week, 3 hours of rehearsal, and about 9 months of rehearsal before you debut the form.
Wow.
So an incredibly intense process.
And you're starting from scratch, right? You do not have an idea for a form or a show heading into it. You just have maybe the parameters, like we're going to do an hour and it's us 8 people, or is that correct?
Yeah. like Close Quarters was a group Peter Gwynn put together. He invited Noah Gregoropoulos to come in and direct, and Noah already had some ideas floating around, and we kind of workshopped it. So, but it's not like we're doing shows alongside the learning process as a new indie team might normally do around LA now. It was all like in rehearsal, figuring it out. And that is probably the number one experience that I've had as a performer to like form who I am now, because it was very much, environmental based, relationship based, character based, and all the things that we've done since then on Dasariski and Quartet were locked in that Close Quarters process. So me having just gone through that as a performer, I wanted to kind of give the JTS Brown people a similar experience. And so this was another like practice group that they had put together. It was originally Ike Barinholtz and Jason Sudeikis and like all the people around their age who were kind of younger performers, probably early to mid to late 20s. People who were kind of looking for that next thing. They were on Herald teams, but maybe not quite satisfied at the level they were at and wanted to do something a little deeper. So Mick Napier from Annoyance was coaching them at the time, but then Mick got a Second City directing gig and had to give it up. And so I came in, and I think they were thinking we'll rotate different people. I came in, did one rehearsal with them, and I'm like, you guys are going to be the next Jazz Freddy, and you need to let me direct you.
What did you see in that rehearsal that sparked that?
I knew all of them already, so I knew the talent level that I was dealing with. In the early rehearsals, we also had Jack McBrayer and TJ Jagodowski, and then we had Christina Gaussis, Jen Bills, Bumper Carroll. Later, John Lutz, Peter Gross, who you talked to, Rob Janis, Ed Goodman, Jed Resnick, Jillian Vigman, Sarah G. There was
it's a real who's who.
14 people, I think, to begin with. And so I also know I'm dealing with a big group. And so what we ended up creating was a very kind of dreamlike form where there are no sweep edits, no tag outs. Every scene kind of bleeds into the next. So it's kind of following dream logic and transformation. So if you and I are the first scene in the show and Ryan wants to come on and edit, he can either engage us both and transform us. He can engage you and transform you, or engage me and transform me. So if Ryan engages me, you could either stay as another character, you could stay as something inanimate, or you could immediately exit. And so that's kind of like the rule of transformation within it. And you can edit any scene at any time. You can bring back any scene at any time. So your whole rhythms of what you're used to with Harold or Armando are completely out the window.
Yeah, and how do I make it clear when I'm coming on to edit a scene? How do I make it clear that this isn't a walk-on, or vice versa?
There are no walk-ons.
There are no walk-ons. Okay.
Yeah. Any entrance is a transformation.
Got it.
And the top show at the time was the Armando show, which would be upstairs at the Del Close Theater, where there were flats and windows and doors. And the performers would be sitting on the sidelines. And so if you'd see Miles get up and like walk behind the flat, you'd be like, okay, Miles is about to do a walk on. You'd hear it knock on the door and then he'd come in. So in JTS, you could play around with things like, wonder what that pizza's getting here, man. Yeah, I don't know. Like I'm jonesing for some za, and then you hear the knock on the door opens, whoever it is, it's not the pizza man. It's a new scene. It's a new reality as soon as somebody walks in. But if then that person comes in, slams the door again, then maybe we're back in the pizza scene or whatever. So you have to be completely on your toes at any time for transformation. I was influenced by Alice Through the Looking Glass specifically, because there's a scene where Alice she's dealing with, I think, with the Queen of Hearts, and the Queen of Hearts pricks her finger and it's bleeding, and Alice is trying to staunch the bleeding, and the Queen says, that's better, much better, much better. And then the Queen turns into a sheep, and suddenly Alice is in this shop, and there's a sheep woman like behind the counter, and it's like we're in a completely new reality.
Yeah.
And as a kid, like reading a book like that, you just kind of like go with the flow. So I think it was influenced by also like Sergeant Pepper and, Dark Side of the Moon or Paul's Boutique, you know, like any album where tracks are kind of flowing into the next track.
For a straight-laced nerd, you sure do lean hallucinogenic, man. These are some.
I've never done hallucinogens.
You should. You'd love it.
Yeah.
It sounds like you already, you don't need it.
It's trippy, man. Just go with it.
Now, in these JTS Brown shows, I never saw a JTS Brown show. I only heard tell. Again, it was like by the time I was like aware of stuff, it had just passed, or it was like people were still, it was ringing in everyone's ears, and Noah used to talk about it and use it as examples and teach us stuff. But I never saw a show. Like, it's so trippy, it's so exploratory, it's so cool as a piece of art, it sounds like. Was it also funny? Were the scenes funny?
Yes, that's important. But the biggest hurdle for them to get over, because there were so many bells and whistles in it that were weird. We had also another dozen little wrinkles that we could pull out at any time. Like, one exception to the walk-on rule was you and I are doing a scene, and if maybe we're a little vague on the who, what, where, 3 people from the sidelines can come up and ask us 3 rapid-fire questions like, how do you know this person? How do you feel about them? Why don't you tell them you love them? And then you have to answer in character, like rapid-fire, and then the 3 people run back to the sidelines, kind of adopting the tone of your last answer. Ooh! And then you resume the scene. So that's called the third degree. So there's a lot of little... additional spices like the third degree that we would throw in. But bottom line is, because they had all these weird bells and whistles, the scene work could not be weird. And so I was very much trying to impress upon them of it's still all the scene work that we know how to do, relationships, games, things that we believe in. And then we've got all this other crazy shit stylistically and structurally that we're doing, but the scenes need to be solid. You know? So if we can't believe in the reality of it, or if we're editing things before we know what they are, then that's a problem. Yeah,
it's like all this other stuff is the sheen that you put on top of the comedy, and something that makes it feel like more of a holistic theater piece, which is missing from most improv shows where we just see 2 people talking and then a sweep edit.
I very much do and teach comedy improv. I want to be funny. I like laughs. I want to help people be funny as well. But I am also very influenced by my theater training and by the more, we can say pretentiousness. There's a pretentiousness in Chicago sometimes to it, and that's not always a bad thing, of the aspirational thing of we're going to do something new and cool. That always is kind of in the back of my mind as well. So I like there to be a presentational aspect to something. And I want people to, even if it's a pretty fast paced comedy show at a black box theater, and you're mostly playing for your friends, I still want there to be some sort of theatrical flourish to it in some way. Because
the audience has left their house and bought a ticket and driven there and found parking. They're out to have an experience. I
say in LA, you get actors who are dynamic and charismatic and energetic, and they have no idea what's happening in their own scenes. And you have writers who are clever and witty and articulate, and you can't believe anything that's happening in their scenes because they're kind of staring at the floor and mumbling and laughing at themselves as they talk. Those are obviously the polar extremes, but I think the perfect improviser is that mashup of a writer and an actor, kind of holding those 2 powers at equal weight.
Yeah, and I would argue with a sprinkle of a director on top.
Yeah.
And knowing how to vary the tone of your show, or the power of a stage picture, or how to edit in a cool way so that things stay engaging or whatever.
You're an editor. You're a costume designer and a prop master.
And you're a promoter before your show.
Yeah, the business aspect of
it. Let's tangentially explore what you just said a second ago about that you want to help your students be funny, and you're trying to unlock comedy in scenes. What are the tent poles of your method, or what things have you learned over the years that make scenes funny or give students success?
I will say the longer I do this, the less like dogmatic I am about anything. Like I'm not trying to indoctrinate anyone to any, overriding philosophy, because I've seen everything work and I've seen everything not work at this point. And I trust that in LA specifically that they get a healthy dose of game in their diet. I teach at Weegis now, world's greatest improv school. Not my name. Talk to Will Hines. And most of them are UCB trained, or at least Weegis trained. So they've got a good grip on game. And I am not anti-game by any means, but as I've kind of indicated, that became more of a thing as the family left Chicago for New York, and they kind of like honed it at the UCB in New York and translated it to UCB LA. So, I recently subbed Will's level 2, and I remembered how much easier it is to teach game when people have no idea what they're doing.
Right.
Because you'd be like, hey, that thing you did, just do that again.
Yeah, you have enough with that. Yeah,
because people are cycling through so many ideas and forgetting things that they said and did. You just got to get them to lock into that first unusual thing. But once I get people who are a little more advanced, like I don't police choices so much of just like, ooh, was that the right game to play off of that? It's always going to come down to, and I also see people kind of doing games out of obligation of just like, this is what you want, right? This is the right way to do this, but there's no joy in it and there's no playfulness in it because they're doing what they think is the right game or the game that they're supposed to do. And so you lose a little bit of the personality of the player and their own sense of humor. And so, I tell my students that I will help you with game, but it's always going to come down to 3 notes, which is more specificity, more action, more subtext. So details are your fuel. The point of specifics is not that specifics are funny in and of themselves, but it's to inspire the imagination of your partner. So if I say I'm going to the store, that means nothing. But if I say I'm going to 7-Eleven,
you're like, oh, can you grab me a Slurpee, big old Slurpee with go like frozen Coke, cherry, frozen Coke, cherry.
If I'm going to IKEA,
oh man, I need to return this cutting board. It broke, but just tell them I got it broken. And
I'm going to Tiffany.
Can you get my wife a diamond? I'll pay you back in a couple months.
I'm getting your wife a diamond?
I'll pay you back in a couple months.
It's like $20,000.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm paying you back. If it was maybe $20, maybe we'd say it comes out in the wash. But
and so is 7-Eleven or IKEA or Tiffany a funnier store than any other store? Like even like grocery stores, like you could pick Ralph's, you could pick Trader Joe's, you could pick Sprouts. Sprouts is
got
funnier,
a bigger laugh.
Yeah. But you're going to think of different parking lots, different clientele. It's just to get the brain juices going.
Yes.
And then you and I can figure out what we find funny about diamonds or what we find funny about Slurpees. So like that first nudge to specificity is not calculated to be comedic. It's just to fill in a blank and get us thinking about something else.
Well, it revs the and part of yes and. Because if you just say I'm going to the store, I go, okay. But if you say I'm going to 7-Eleven, it's like, ooh, will you grab me a Jumbo Slim Jim? Like there is no and fuel if I don't have something, some detail or image or
And that's kind of been the basis of our philosophy in Dasariski over the years, which is choose to know. Like nothing can surprise you. The improviser doesn't know shit. One line at a time, we're figuring it out. But the character knows where they are. Character knows who they're with. Character knows why they're with who they're with. Character knows why they are where they are. Character knows what they're doing. Character knows why they're doing what they're doing. Yes, there are exceptions. There are times when something, is brought up like it's a revelation or a surprise to the other character, but you can still choose to know within that. Like, honey, I got to tell you something. I'm pregnant. I thought so. You've been throwing up every night for a week,
right.
Which is, I have information that can corroborate that now that I know that.
Instead of just, what? Which is a yes, but not a yes and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so action, I see so many game scenes kind of spinning their wheels and never getting to the thing that's where the funny is actually taking place. You know, like a lot of times it feels like the funny thing happened about 10 seconds before the scene started. You know,
Give me an example of that. Could be an arbitrary made up example, but I want to make sure I got what you're getting at.
well, I think one thing that happens, and this might be a different note maybe, but people get hung up on the first iteration or the first symptom of the game. So like, if it's like, dude, like I left my house for 2 days. You're watching over my fish and they're all dead. Yeah, sorry, bud. I don't know what happened. Yeah, they were just all floating there. But if 2 minutes later we're still talking about dead fish, that's a problem because the scene is not dead fish. The scene is bad house sitter.
Yep.
And so you've got to find other iterations, other examples of that game. And so I think I see so many things just get hung up on the first thing and kind of spin their wheels from there. And like that's never going to get resolved. So I think people are trained to recognize the first unusual thing and to call it out, but ultimately their job is to make it happen more. And I don't see enough voice of reason people trying to make it happen more. So it's the little bit of patting your head and rubbing your belly, which is like, clearly my character doesn't want this to happen. But me, the improviser, me, the co-writer of this scene, want my partner to be able to keep doing their unusual thing and to keep setting them up in circumstances where they can repeat that behavior. So even if it's annoying or angering my character, I need to fuel the scene by action.
Right. Otherwise, all we have is, no, you didn't. Yes, I did. Or you shouldn't. Yes, I want to. No, but you shouldn't. Yes, I won't.
And the worst improv scene is two characters of equal status who both think they're right. That scene is going nowhere.
That's not a scene. Yeah.
So you got to tip the scales one way or another. Status helps.
Yep.
With that, like and we don't want to see two unpleasant people being unpleasant to each other.
Right.
We will watch one asshole treating someone we love terribly. You know, so it's always better to lose the fight, to be the victim. We'll give you a victory at the end. You know, we don't want to see just abuse.
Yeah.
You know, if a character is being kind of downtrodden, we'll give them a victory at the end. But we need to feel that force upon them. So then when the status reverses, you know, that we've felt the weight of that. But people are constantly trying to talk their way out of circumstances rather than just accept the circumstances that they're in and keep heightening them.
I think, yeah, it's almost like our human nature takes over. We don't want to be a victim in real life. So like us playing the character, we absorb that feeling of defensiveness or of excuses or whatever, like the way that we avoid things, discomfort in real life. And it's like, no, go head first into the discomfort or have your character do it.
Go where the danger is.
Right.
In life, we're risk averse, we're danger averse, so we're constantly trying to talk our way into better circumstances. You know, people would eliminate 90% of their worst scenes if they didn't devote any time to trying to change the who, the what, or the where, which is like this behavior that you're doing. What if you weren't doing it? You know, basically you can call out the behavior once. It's like, hey, you're doing a lot of this. And then it's like, okay, well, anyway, let's go over these reports,
right.
You know? So once I introduce the action, then I'm setting you up to repeat that behavior. But, you know, if I'm spending my scene saying, hey, comedic character, don't do that one thing that everybody's enjoying so much.
Stop being a comedic character and start being boring and normal for this paying audience.
Yeah. Don't try to win the other person over to the more boring.
Right. Yeah. And comedy scenes are not about proving your point or being right or winning the argument. It's about seeing this thing play out.
Yeah.
Yeah. The third one you said was subtext. How do you play subtext?
By not having the characters know everything that the writers know. And so, I mean, this is why I don't watch SNL anymore, you know, because also I have no friends on there anymore. All those people know me well and hate me. No, no, for years I had friends and family members on that show. And so I would watch it out of, you know, obligation, you know. But whenever they're worried that you might not get the joke, like it's right there in the text of like, dude, did you just take your pants off? It's like, I just saw that he took his pants off, like you don't have to say that, So I think in life, truth is the last resort. We don't say the truth unless it's forced out of us. So like annoying coworker would be a common, setup for a scene. So in life, you just have to deal with this person all the time, Yeah, Toby, I think I'm just going to do lunch by myself today. Yeah, I just got some things I got to catch up on. So no, that's cool. Yeah, you go to PF Chang's, and I'm just gonna stay. No, Toby, actually, we've gone to PF Chang's before, and it was fun. But I really just gotta go over this thing. So but what 2 minutes later, you can get to it like, Toby,
I don't
leave me the fuck alone. But if I start with you're an annoying coworker, then it's just gonna be it's going to be negotiating, problem solving, and brainstorming. And those are all the death of comedy.
Got it. So what you're calling subtext is like we as the audience can see the emotional point of view of the character, even though their words are being tactful and polite. They're giving Toby all the social cues. Toby's not picking them up.
And it's the opposite between what the improviser / writer is asking for and what the character is asking for. So if I say, calm down, man, I'm really saying, be frantic,
right.
Be frantic,
Right.
So it's often the opposite of what we're asking for is what we need in order for the comedic behavior to repeat.
I think that that exact example is one that you gave when you were teaching maybe my level 3 class or level 4 class at IO. Wow. But it was a giant light bulb for me. Like, oh, whoa. Because, early improv training is very yes and forward. And you frequently misunderstand what that means, where you always have to like do what the other person says, or agreement means agreeing with their request was my and many other people's misunderstanding of yes and. But yeah, calm down, man, is implying like the reality of the scene is that you are freaking out right now. That's why my character is saying this. So the best support you can give the scene is to absolutely be freaking. Yeah.
You are already giving this performance.
Yes.
You don't know it yet, but like this is all you need to do in order to play this game.
Yeah.
So yeah, yes and is more of a philosophical, metaphorical idea than a literal idea.
Right.
And so that's why I've replaced yes and scenes with I know scenes to just kind of like to push that muscle of choosing to know. So like in a yes and scene of like, we need to clean the bathroom. Yes, and we need to clean the kitchen. And now you got to clean 2 rooms and you don't know why, and we need to clean the bathroom. I know Booter took a huge deuce in there,
Right.
So like it narrows the possibilities, whereas yes and is more like tangent, like
right.
New things are constantly coming up. But the process of improvising a scene is from infinite possibilities. You do or say anything and it shrinks it down, it shrinks it down, it shrinks it down. So you get the one unique point on the infinite spectrum of scenes.
Right. And philosophically, I would call what you just did yes-anding. Like you're agreeing that that the bathroom needs to be cleaned and this is the reality we're in. And you're adding to that reality by explaining, in this case, the why. Booter took a dump. And the why and the what and a different who.
It's just agreeing all this stuff is happening and I'm going to add some more information to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my character doesn't have to have the same point of view on it as you do.
Right.
I also don't have to, do all the things your other character is requesting me to do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, we need to clean the bathroom right now. Oh, right now?
Yeah.
I just got a new PlayStation. Uh-huh. Yeah.
But I do say if we are covering the same like negotiation over and over, then like you eventually have to say yes to action.
Of course.
And so like another classic example is like parent trying to get like teenager to clean their room. And it's like the teenager can come up with all the reasons to not clean their room. But ultimately you've got to do what the parent says, but you can then clean your room poorly.
In your way.
Clean
right.
your room through protest.
Yeah.
Mock them as you clean. So you have to say yes to the action, but you don't have to do it in the way that they want you to.
Yeah. Let's talk Dasariski. This is like your most influential, monumental group, I would say. Oh, Mr. President.
Well, yes, here we are, Dasariski.
Mr. President of old. Polk? Was that Polk?
That was James K. Polk. Thank you. Don't know why SNL did not hire me.
I would have.
Yeah, I just did James K. Polk, Zachary Taylor, and Millard Fillmore were my 3 characters.
James K. Polk was a Jeopardy question the other night. Do you know what the K stands for?
Knox?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow, well done. Cool.
That's kind of my thing, presidential trivia. What were we talking about?
Presidential trivia.
Great.
You're in luck.
Okay.
I am distantly related to Zachary Taylor.
What?
And William Howard Taft. Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know how. It's like in the family Bible, like many, many branches away.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Where's my generational wealth? God damn it. Dasariski, talk me through the origin, the philosophy, what you guys do.
So that's me, Bob Dassey, Rich Tallarico. We've taken 3 letters from each of our names and put it together in something that nobody can spell or pronounce. So that was the mistake going into it. I've heard Dasariski a lot. But it's equitable. 3 letters from each. So before that, they had a group called Trio that was Bob and Rich and Stephanie Weir. And that was, I have to say, in the 90s in Chicago, there were a few examples, but there weren't a lot of slow play or 2-person shows. There was one with Jimmy Carrane and Steph Weir that was called Naked, and it was 1 hour-long scene on the dot. Like they would pull lights on an hour regardless of what they were doing at the time. 2 characters, no walk-ons, no edits, real time.
Slice of life.
Yeah.
1 hour in the life of these people.
Exactly. So that was kind of the first example that I really remember in that vein. And Trio was this, and that was kind of like the first like late night show, because I think at least a couple of them were, Rich and Steph were on main stage at that point, so they had to like wait till their show was done on Sunday night and do like an 11 o'clock at IO in the Cabaret, and it got a huge following. This is before TJ and Dave were starting, and then Bob wanted to form like all these other groups kind of in that vein, and I think his inspiration was specific, and you'd have to ask him specifically how he got there, but it's like the liner notes to Miles Davis's album Kind of Blue, like the big influential jazz album, has some liner notes written for it, and something about that inspired Bob to do like his improv version of that. So it's but when I joined them as Dasariski, we started doing shows in Chicago. We would typically do probably 50 to an hour. It's not necessarily monoscene, though we have done monoscenes. It's not necessarily what became the Pretty Flower, though we have also done that very much. And I would say that's mostly the form that we've kind of settled into, which is one kind of base scene of 3 characters and then splintering off to see other people in their lives. But depending on the needs of that particular night, that particular suggestion, the story that unfolds from it, we've taken all sorts of different structures to it.
Gotcha. And in my awareness, you guys created that Pretty Flower form. Like Bob named it the Pretty Flower,
Bob
right?
named it the Pretty Flower, working with Sentimental Lady, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was based on things that Sentimental Lady was doing, and maybe that Convoy was doing, and maybe that Dasariski was doing,
Yeah, it came to us like later than you, that like Sentimental Lady, we started doing it after it kind of already existed.
Okay.
So I'm trying to trace the paternity test here. I'm like, yeah.
I started hearing about it long before I knew it was what we did. And then groups would ask me to coach them, and I'd be like, okay, cool. So tell me, how does it work? And they'd be like, isn't it what you do? And I'd be like, I don't know. So I've never I have helped people with it, but I've never codified it in any way to know exactly what the Pretty Flower form is.
Gotcha. Yeah. I've seen Dasariski many times. The shows are so good. They pay off in a way that many improv shows don't. The way that you all are able to remember so many little details, little, like throwaway lines that you all grab and use. And so the superpower of what we will call the pretty flower, but the superpower of like splintering off from a mono scene, exploring a character's life and coming back, it allows the audience to be in on something that the other characters aren't in on. We can know, like if Bob's talking about what he's going to do with all this money that you guys just dug up in a chest, and he's going to invest it, and he's going to turn it into more money, and we splinter off and see how his future turns out. And it's like company after company failing, and then we come back. Now we know like his dream is going to fail. So the more like bombastic he is about that, I feel like I've seen you guys toy with that, or toy with seeing a character with someone else in their lives, Laurent style, like who treats them differently than these people, or these people aren't aware of like what their home life is like or whatever. Now he can be a character who's kind of lying to his friends about how things are, but we know better as the audience.
So it's basically building on any of the techniques, that we'd learned over the years. So there's some Laurent and close quarters in there. Sometimes we will like close quarters style follow just one environment throughout. Sometimes we will mono scene it as long as possible until like one of those characters has to break out into their own story, or we follow one of those characters as a tangent. Anything you would normally do through tag outs or walk-ons, we can do in that form.
When you say until a character has to break out, what's that feeling? What are you grabbing onto?
Something where what the most interesting thing is not what we're currently looking at, so whether it's a flashback or it's a cut ahead to their future, or, generally in improv, we try to avoid talking about the past, the future, and other people, but they invariably come up. And so whenever you talk about the past, the future, other people, we could cut to that. And you can do that as a quick cutaway. So, we mention like Aunt Edna very early in the show. Now, some people might bookmark Aunt Edna of like, oh, that's going to come back, maybe 20 minutes later. What you could do is immediately like cut to of like, okay, Aunt Edna, I have your groceries here. Just leave them on the table. And maybe that's a 30-second scene. And of like, yeah, anyway, of like, and then we cut back to the original scene of like, I don't know what's going on with their head these days. And so now we've got that plate spinning. The Aunt Edna plate is there. We can return to that at any point. It's certainly not going to be just like a one-off if we've taken the point to create it, and then maybe later we end up going and seeing, a whole run of Aunt Edna stuff that's going on. So it's kind of like knowing that you've got this long format of doing close to an hour, you can just get all these different plates spinning and then alternate between them. And so you need lots and lots of little games. Individual character games, relationship games. Me and Rich is different than Bob and Rich, different than me and Bob. You've got wordplay games, you've got environmental or object work games, and you've got more traditional, premise-based games as well. Yeah.
Give a quick example of an object work game.
Well, they are really the ones who are masters at it. Like I've had to work hard over the years to get mediocre at object work. I just remember so many times of Dassy being, a server and just like bringing in, trays and trays of stuff and like, it's any pattern. Any
right.
pattern is a game. So, and your commitment to that is part of it. So like Dassy is someone who can hold the audience's attention for minutes at a time, just miming objects. So incredible. It's like, it's making it real and committing to it, and then just going back to patterns, and they've got to be slightly more heightened every time. I think my favorite structure that we did for a show was, we got the suggestion map room, and we were three guys, and I think I was imagining almost that we were like, 19th century explorers of like, there it is, gentlemen, Antarctica. Yes, soon we will set sail. And we were kind of like talking in this very kind of broad stylistic way. And then we ended up kind of discovering that we were three teachers at a community college. And then we cut to Rich's life, which was him and his girlfriend. And that was like a 5-minute cutaway back to the map room. Ah, yes, soon we will leave, and we will have a Portuguese crew of 5. And then we cut away to Dassey's life. He still lived with his parents, and I was his alcoholic dad who was building jigsaw puzzles and ignoring him. And Rich was his mom, and that was like a 10-minute cutaway. And then finally, and we go back to the map room of like, yes, we will sail. And then we did a cutaway to me teaching Moby Dick to 2 stoner students, and that was like a half-hour long cutaway within the map room structure, and that ended up kind of being the main course. And that was just like almost a mono scene of me teaching Moby Dick to these guys, me admitting I'd never read the book, even though I'd been teaching it for years. They'd never read the book. We all get in their car, in my car. I'm living in my car. We all get high together. There's a dead hamster in the back of like the specificity and the detail kept getting layered on. And so the structure was almost like creating these kind of like presumably high status guys and then undermining them in each cutaway.
Yeah.
But that was just like one base scene with 3 cutaways to each of our lives, each one going longer and longer and deeper and giving more of a sense of who we were outside of the reality of the map room. So I'll never forget that structure that just kind of came up organically in order to tell that story that night.
I love that. I mean, this speaks to your genius memory. You remember so many details of that show, and I can't remember a show I did 2 nights ago. I'm like, who was in that show?
Well, we taped every show because at a time we were looking to turn them into pilot scripts and screenplays. So like we would video every show. We would transcribe the ones that we liked. That's how I came up with Choose to Know, because we noticed in the shows that worked a lot, we would literally were saying the phrase, I know a lot. And so that kind of like reinforced that behavior. And then some of these we ended up adapting. The reason I remember Map Room is we ended up adapting it into a 1-act play mashed up with 2 of our other shows.
Oh, cool.
So we've done that a couple times. So that sticks in the brain a little more. But
yeah, I remember on Zoom a few years ago, you guys did a staged reading of one of your shows.
Yes.
One of your transcripts that I went to. I don't remember, but
was that Sudoku Killer?
Nope.
Okay.
I think I would remember that, but
Okay,
it would sound familiar if but I don't remember what it was. I can't.
Sudoku Killer was like, it was around the time that Zodiac came out, I think. And so like we were like 3 cops, and it was like, well, let's look up the grid of the city of like, well, he's killed 1 person over here, so he can't kill 1 person over in this block. It's got to be a 9. You know?
It's so funny. My God, he's about to kill 8 people in the in the Burger King.
Yeah.
It's the only answer. That's so funny. Your team, Dasariski, is a group that is very comfortable with silences and with engaging in object work and just waiting for your next moment in those silences. How do you keep yourself from just inventing something and like making up what the next thing is? How are you using what's there, and what's your internal process?
When we start a show, we'll come out, talk to the audience, get a suggestion. Ideally, I always want to black out before we go into the show. So again, like it's that theatricality of just like cut to black, fade up slowly, so it feels like we're joining this reality already in progress. As I've said, like my pet peeve is like to see people on stage thinking. So like it's something I call my Ouija students out on when it's like, can we have a word? Scrabble. Like somebody just start doing something right away. But like that blackout gives you that little chance to think about something, and then the lights will slowly fade up, and I'll look at what Bob and Rich are doing, and it's usually something physical. Also, I've adjusted my spine in some way in that blackout, so I can start thinking with somebody else's brain. Because the longer I feel like myself in improv, the harder it is. And because I'm a human being and I'm complex and I might behave any sort of way, on any sort of day. But if I put my shoulders back a little bit, then this guy, I already have a deep voice. This guy has a deeper voice. This guy's using more clipped tones, So I'll start to think with that person's brain. I'll start to talk like that person. So that helps. So like the more that we've immersed ourselves in this world that's already going before the audience has been privy to it. And then Bob and Rich are so great at just keeping environment alive, and like when in doubt, like going back to object work and realizing the characters are there for some reason, even if it's something boring. Like you could do a whole scene seated on a park bench, but it's like there's pigeons and there's popcorn, and there's slides and jungle gym over there, and there's maybe some drug dealers over there. Frisbee, a little help. There you go.
The weather is changing.
The weather is changing. Oh, I better zip up my jacket. So like you could do a whole scene seated in a chair, but there's a rich environment around you. So I think keeping that alive, remembering that it's always people in a place doing a thing. It's not writers talking about, a comedic idea in the abstract.
Right. You're not inventing or reaching for an idea that's not earned by what your character would see looking around them or feel from the relationship of the other people and what they can assume about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Though I am the person who's probably thinking more than others. Like, if I'm honest, like there is a tiny portion of my brain that is thinking to callbacks and what have we not paid off yet? Mm-hmm. If there's something I always think in any improv scene, it's like, what don't we know yet? What don't we know yet? So it's classic. If this is true, what else is true stuff, building on what's already out there. And like, there's always something that can be made more specific or fleshed out a little bit. So mostly I'm in the moment, but also like I've devoted a portion of my brain to thinking about other stuff, and I would say like Bob is the heart of the show, of like he brings the emotions and the commitment. Rich is the gut, meaning of like don't read too much into that, but like he's acting on instinct. He's belly laughs of like his ability to get to the funny like so quickly, and to immediately boil something down into like the simplest and clearest game that's not what anyone would have thought of, And I'm more of the head. Like I'm always thinking about specificity and connections and structure and things like that.
Improv Voltron. The three of you make a perfect improv robot.
Yeah.
We're almost at, we're way over time, but just a few quick questions to end on. Of teaching, performing, and directing, is there one that you prefer?
No, I love it all. I've teaching a lot more again lately because like IO West was my home theater, closed in 2018. Long story that we won't get into. Second City Hollywood closed during the pandemic. I also taught stuff there. So I kind of like was floating around LA without a home, and now being at Weegis again, so great of like Will and Jim, and Sarah to have reached out to me, and like I've just discovered like this incredible group of people that are so committed. And I teach a monthly class, so it's Wednesday nights, and people sign up for 4 at a time. They can come and go. They can sign up month after month, or just take 1 month. Which is a format that I've done as a student in acting classes, and I think it works well because I can always just work on whatever I feel like working on that day. But there's also kind of a month-long arc to it. So like lately I've been teaching one form all month. So we've been doing living room this month. And I did close quarters the previous month.
What is the close quarters form?
Close quarters is basic. Well, man, we don't have time to get into that either. But
email me.
The most basic thing is a bunch of scenes at more or less the same place at more or less the same time. So bowling alley,
cocktail party style. Yeah.
So bowling alley, you've got one scene in lane 11. You've got another scene in the arcade. You've got a scene in the snack booth. You've got a scene out by the dumpster. You've got a scene in the bathroom. Carla, my wife, and I, our duo, Orange Tuxedo, we do a 2-person close quarters. So if we have like a 40-minute set for a festival, we'll create 4 different pairs of 2 jump. And so hope to build it to an 8-person scene by the end where we're playing all of our characters interacting with each other.
Jesus, I do not have that brain. What's your favorite kind of character to play, or characters?
Idiotic authority figures, I think, which is kind of redundant to say, but like anything that's speaking truth to power and punching down. Tammy Sager used to tell me that I'm great at playing bad boyfriends as well.
Give me a little bit of bad boyfriend. What's that character?
Yeah. So I just don't feel like going, babe. No, I'm gonna stay here.
It's the Emmys.
Yeah. Good luck with that. So what, you got like a nomination or something?
Yes.
Sweet.
This is the biggest thing that's ever happened in my career.
That's like the little show you do, right? With
It's pretty big now. It's pretty big.
Mad Men.
Mad Men.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was all one word.
Mad Men.
Mad Men.
It's so funny.
Narcissists.
Yeah. It's the catharsis aspect of improv where we get to put on the mask and clown about the villains in our lives and expel the poison that way.
Yeah, I'm generally a pretty nice guy. I'd like to, think, but like my characters tend to be like a little darker.
Yeah, nice isn't very funny.
No,
only when they're getting beat up. And where do you think you've seen improv through so many of its iterations? Where do you think we're headed?
Oh God. I did start to think during the pandemic that like. If Harold is done, like, that's cool. I personally, I love teaching Harold. I love doing Harold, but maybe the era of the 8-person improv team, because that's a holdover from like Sharna was creating teams of like, it's 8 rabbis, it's 8 cops. Those were the early days of Improv Olympic. Was like, it was like a social experiment.
Wait, 8 actual rabbis and 8 actual cops?
Yeah, she had improv competitions of like 8 lawyers, 8 doctors, 8 cops, 8 rabbis. Yeah.
Wait, were they trained in improv, or was it like?
I think so, in theory. Yeah.
So wild.
But if it's a device to, get as many people on stage as possible at once so they can invite people of like, and then UCB took the IO model to New York and then LA. And then so now like we have the standard 8-person improv team is just like a thing. And even like the idea of teams and coaches go back to the days of competition as well. It's not a competition anymore, but we still use that terminology of teams and coaches.
Rather than director and rehearsal and practice. And
And so like we're maybe getting more into the comedy sports of it all rather than the theatricality of it. And I think my reason for saying that about Harold is I just see teams that have to do it out of obligation and they don't really love it, And I think a Harold only really lands when people love the form and really want to commit to it and put their own mark on it, and they're not just doing, the training wheels Harold out of obligation. So anyway, that's my side note about that specific form.
Where do you hope we're headed?
I see it growing all over. Like, it's amazing how it's in every city in the US. It's everywhere in the world now. And going over to Europe and seeing where they are, maybe about 20 years behind, but they are accelerating quickly because there's so much more information out there. There are books. There is the internet.
Yeah, live streamed shows that are high quality now. Yeah,
exactly. And there is much more cross-pollination, and people can train from the best people in the world, and there is a lot more theatricality to what they're doing in Europe as well.
Yes.
And getting to travel a lot to festivals and just seeing what people are doing all over the country and all over the world, like, it's really exciting. And it kind of hit critical mass in New York, Chicago, LA, where the theaters had gotten too big and gotten away from their mom and pop roots and had a lot of reckoning of mistakes that they had made, And so all those places kind of like blew up and crumbled, and now we're rebuilding them a little bit, in hopefully with better models and better aspirations. And there's so much talent in this town. Like, it's ridiculous, like how many great people are in LA, and just to see people like falling in love with this art form. And like, I teach everyone differently. Like, everyone is their own mutant. I'm Professor X and I've got to bring out their mutant power. I'm not giving them powers they don't already possess. I'm helping them train and focus what's already innate within them. So each new person to me is their own little puzzle to figure out, and then their own little, piece of gold when they figure it out.
Man, what a quote. That's your episode quote right there. What would you like to plug? You're teaching at Weegis.
Yeah.
You're directing a show right now?
I'm directing Will Hines and Ian Roberts. Ian Roberts, my first improv coach. It has come full circle. He has to learn from me now. So Will and Ian are doing a show called High Functioning at the UCB Annex. That's every Saturday at 7:00. It's been so incredible and rewarding working with them because they're so nerdy about improv, and like these basic warm-ups and exercises that I do with my class that when I want to move on right away, they're like, can we do that again? And I'm going from this interview straight to a rehearsal with them. The show has already been running for a month and they still keep rehearsing. So yeah. And then Orange Tuxedo Improv for stuff that me and Carla are doing. We typically do more stuff out of town than in LA, but we might actually we have something coming up with Bob and Steph. So they are Weird Ass, we are Orange Tuxedo, so we're doing some weird tuxedo shows with the four of us matching up.
Great. When and where?
We're doing one at the Outside In Theater, which is, or maybe it's the Inside Out Theater. It's a new space in Highland Park.
Oh, cool.
That's going to be a long form theater.
Oh, cool. When are the shows, or do we just look it up?
We'll look it up. It might be
summer.
after this episode drops.
Right,
so,
got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Coming 2 weeks ago. Thank you so much for being here and for everything you bring to the improv world and for all the great people you've trained. We are all your minions, your mutant minions, and we owe so much to you. So thank you.
Thanks, Susie.
Yeah. If you have a question about improv that you would like me to ask a future guest, email it to yesalsopod@gmail.com and I will get it on the show. If you're a fan of the show, follow us on Instagram at yesalsopod. And please help us out by liking, rating, reviewing, clicking, sending, talking, and blasting us to your improv communities. That will help us out a lot. If you're a theater who would like to host us for a live recording and improv show, let us know at yesalsopod@gmail.com. A huge shout out to Ryan Rosenberg, who produced this thing with his generous help and his unlimited knowledge about all things podcast. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week. No, we won't, Susie. That's not how podcasts work. They will see. They won't even see us. They will listen to us. So it's actually the opposite of both things you said. Thanks for listening, and you will listen to us next week. Maybe. We don't know.